Today we've heard the story of Jesus' rejection from his hometown, but his determination to still send out the mission of his disciples into the world. There are many parallels, it seems to me, from the gospel in our lives. A beautiful example this week I came across when I accidentally watched the National Press Club on the ABC TV. Nyadol Nyuon, if that's the right pronunciation, she's a very impressive person. But she launched the report of the very first comprehensive study of Australian migrant women. She tells a story about her arrival in Australia after a lifetime in refugee camps. She said, Australia first felt like home when, after living in a refugee camp in Kenya and praying nightly with her mum to escape, she touched down at Tullamarine Airport in Melbourne in 2005, holding her Australian passport. I handed that passport to the immigration officer. She inspected it, Nyadol said, and returned it to me and said, "Welcome home." Miss Nyuon said, "Welcome home?" These were the words that marked for me the end of a search for a physical home, but the beginning of a sense of an emerging identity. Nyadol's story is one of hope, but also of struggle. While she was embraced in her home, it also, she said, has rejected her. These parallels we see also in the gospel today, as I said. It begins with the rejection of Jesus by his hometown folk. This rejection seems to be because they feel they have knowledge of Jesus, but that actually stops seeing who he really is, stops them accepting where he might have got his wisdom or power, stops them even wanting to explore possible answers or being open to other answers. Perhaps there is a deeper warning for us all here, those of us who are regular churchgoers or who have been steeped in the life of Jesus across decades and therefore have covered him with many accretions, might need to think again. We might have made him comfortable for ourselves. As we enter NAIDOC week this week, I'm reminded again about the way white Europeans came to Australia with what we might call, or what has been called, our colonial Jesus, a Jesus created in the image of the colonisers of Australia. I think we must go on asking ourselves how much of this Jesus we still hold on to. But this colonial Jesus we need to reject. Perhaps a motto I read about this week is one we should hold at the forefront of our minds. Beware of finding a Jesus entirely congenial to you. But there's another side to this rejection of Jesus in his hometown. And this insight too, I think, must be allowed to shed light on our life as Christians and churches as we follow Jesus and as we seek to develop community around us. Scholars also point to other verses in chapter 3 of Mark that suggest that Jesus' physical relationship to his family also proved to be a stumbling block because he was known as a carpenter or a tekton. Now this could be translated as builder, but the main point here was that in this Greco-Roman world, and perhaps this was flowing over into the Jewish world as well of that day, there was a strong divide between those who had to work with their hands and those who did not. So again, here's a sense in which they looked down upon this Jesus, therefore couldn't accept him. The Irish scholar John Dominic Crossan quotes pagan philosopher Celsus here, and I think this is a good insight. He says, at least Celsus says, the great offence of the Christian faith was not the claim that a human could be born of a virgin or that a human could be divine, but the fact that it could happen to a member of the lower classes. Who does he think he is? I know from Nyadol Nyuon's speech the other day that this is a common response to her from some. As she said, she's loath to speak about some of the atrocious racist remarks that have been made to her. As she said, many people expect that because of what Australia has given me, I should simply be grateful. Discussions about race or racism are seen as biting the hand that fed you. She's overreaching herself, isn't she? They say. There are other parallels that we can hear from this gospel in our lives as well. Fortunately, neither Nyadol Nyuon nor Jesus Christ would be distracted from their mission. Both, it seems to me, are working for the dawning of God afresh in our world. With regard to Jesus, we see this from the second part of the gospel reading. In this section we hear about Jesus going out to other villages, calling the 12 and sending them out and asking them to travel lightly. Perhaps one lesson for us here is simple. Susan Guthrie, the American author and spiritual guide, writes that the 12 were sent out 2 by 2 to preach and to heal and to call others to repentance. They were, she wrote, amateurs at the time, but Jesus sent them anyway to learn by doing and failing. We are amateur human beings, she writes. We bumble along generation by generation and sometimes stumble into our humanity, not by being safe, but by trying to emulate the one who gave his life in compassion. Yes, we are still amateur human beings, aren't we? At least that's how I feel. And especially amateur evangelists. But we're not sent without bread or without bag or money in our belts. And perhaps this is the problem. Too much stuff ties us down or is tying us down. I suspect Miss Nyuon knows more about travelling lightly than most other Australians. So if I'm to sum up my reflection here, I would want to say this. On the one hand, following Jesus means taking a stance and turning up to take leadership or action about something of importance, but that this will in all likelihood mean rejection by our peers to some extent, or by our family, or at least misunderstanding, or rejection by those who work with us or simply share community life. On the other hand, it does take courage to act and to get involved in community activity of any kind, but especially if it is activity of political and religious kind or of matters of faith. Either way, there are lessons here from Jesus and from the story about Nyadol that make it apparent to us that there are no easier way around difficulties. We should expect no easy pathways, but there is joy and probably peace of my heart and mind, because this is how we learn and grow as individuals and as community. Neither Nyadol nor Jesus were distracted from their ministry. Finally, I think Nyadol Nyuon is for me a Christ figure in our world, a prophet, someone whom we might emulate. Knowing rejection in her home, Australia, she names her mission and is enacting it. I want us to reimagine this country, she says. Multiculturalism is a grand and revolutionary concept, but I think its purpose is really simple. It is to live with each other without the fear of each other. Well, these sentiments and hopes are, I think, one with the words of Jesus and his mission. As citizens and as members of Christ's church, we must ask, do we also want to enact the vision of Christ, or do we, to all intents and purposes, also want to reject Jesus?